The conference room fell silent as Mark Whitman's words hung in the air like poison gas. My hands, folded neatly on the mahogany table, didn't shake, though God knows they wanted to. I'd rehearsed this moment 100 times in my head, prepared for resistance, maybe even skepticism. But nothing could have prepared me for the sound of his laughter. You. He leaned back in his leather chair, the kind that cost more than my monthly rent, and exchanged glances with the 2 other executives flanking him. Imani, let me be frank with you. You're not leadership material. 6 words. That's all it took to summarize 8 years of 60-hour weeks, flawless reports, and strategies that had saved this company millions. 6 words to dismiss every late night I'd spent triple-checking projections while my colleagues were home with their families. 6 words to tell me that no matter how perfect my work was, I would never be enough in their eyes. I should have stormed out. I should have cursed him out right there. Consequences be damned. But I'm not built that way. My grandmother didn't raise me to give white men the satisfaction of seeing me break. So instead, I met his pale blue eyes with mine, steady, unflinching, and said simply, "I see. Thank you for your time." The walk back to my desk felt like miles. Past the glass walls where my colleagues pretended not to notice. Past the break room where whispers would soon start. Past the motivational posters about innovation and excellence that suddenly felt like cruel jokes. I sat down at my workstation, the same one I'd occupied for nearly a decade, and stared at my reflection in the dark computer screen. A black woman stared back at me. Dark skin, natural hair pulled into a professional twist-out, vintage frames that had taken me weeks to choose because I knew I had to look approachable but competent. I'd played by every rule they'd written, and some they'd never bothered to spell out. I'd made myself smaller, quieter, more palatable. I'd watched less qualified people climb the ladder while I held it steady. And for what? 3 days later, the announcement came via company-wide email. Derrick Fields had been promoted to sector lead. Derrick, 30 years old, charming smile, had been with the company for 18 months. Derrick, who came to me at least twice a week to pick my brain about basic financial modeling. Derrick, who was a good guy, really, just profoundly, almost comically unprepared for the role they'd just handed him. I read that email 5 times, each word cutting deeper than the last. Then I opened a new document and started typing my resignation letter. I made it through 3 paragraphs before my hands finally started to shake. But here's what Mark Whitman didn't know as he sat in his corner office, probably already forgetting my name. I wasn't going to just leave. I was going to make sure that when I walked out that door, everyone would finally see exactly what they'd been taking for granted all along. And it was going to cost him everything. Before we continue, I want to know, which city are you watching this from? Drop your location in the comments. I love seeing where my stories reach. Now, let me take you back to where this all began. I've been invisible my entire career. Not literally, of course. I show up on security cameras, my employee badge works just fine, and my name appears on every report I've ever written. But in the ways that matter, in the rooms where decisions are made and futures are shaped, I might as well be a ghost. Let me paint you a picture of my life before everything changed. Every morning, I arrived at the office at 6:47 a.m., not 6:45, not 6:50, 6:47. Early enough to beat the traffic. Late enough that the security guard, Marcus, would be at his post to exchange our daily greeting. "Morning, Ms. Brooks," he'd say, and I'd smile back, appreciating that he was often the only person who'd acknowledge me by name all day. The office building in Midtown Atlanta was one of those gleaming towers that looked impressive in recruitment brochures, all glass and steel and carefully curated artwork in the lobby. Our company, TechVance Solutions, occupied floors 12 through 16. I worked on 14 in a sea of cubicles that the interior designer had probably called an open, collaborative workspace, but which really just meant there was nowhere to hide from the fluorescent lights and the constant hum of forced productivity. My desk was in the corner, near the windows, not because I had seniority, but because nobody else wanted it. Too much glare on the screens, they said. I didn't mind. On clear days, I could see Stone Mountain in the distance, and something about that view reminded me that there was a world outside these walls. A world where my worth wasn't determined by whether Mark Whitman remembered to copy me on an email. I'd been at TechVance for 8 years, 2 months, and 16 days. Not that I was counting. I was absolutely counting. I'd started as a junior analyst fresh out of Georgia State's business school, bright-eyed and armed with a degree I'd worked 3 jobs to afford. Back then, I genuinely believed that excellence would be enough, that if I worked harder, stayed later, and produced better results than everyone around me, I'd rise through the ranks like I'd been promised. The first year, I told myself I was paying my dues. The second year, I convinced myself I was building a foundation. By the third year, I started to notice the pattern. Michael Chen, who'd started the same month as me, was promoted to senior analyst. He was good at his job. I'm not saying he wasn't, but his reports regularly came to me for a quick review before he submitted them. 6 months later, Jennifer Rodriguez moved up. Again, talented woman, but I'd literally trained her on our financial modeling software. Then came Bradley Thompson, who'd been hired a full year after me, but who, according to Mark, really understood the big picture. I understood the big picture just fine. The picture was that I could be the best analyst in the building, which I was, and still be overlooked when it came time to hand out opportunities. But I didn't complain. Complaining got Black women labeled as difficult or not team players. Instead, I worked harder. I became the person everyone came to when they needed something done right. When the quarterly forecast looked wrong, they came to me. When a client presentation needed that extra polish, they came to me. When the numbers didn't add up and someone's job was on the line, they came to me. I was the safety net everyone relied on and no one credited. My typical day looked something like this. Coffee from the break room. Never the fancy stuff from the cafe downstairs. That was for people whose time was valued. 2 hours of deep work before the morning meeting where I'd present findings that Mark would inevitably reframe as his own insights. Lunch at my desk while responding to urgent requests that could have waited. Afternoon meetings where I'd watch less experienced colleagues fumble through presentations I could deliver in my sleep. And then the real work would begin around 4 p.m. when everyone else started packing up. That's when I'd dive into the complex projects, the ones that required actual analytical skill. I'd lose myself in spreadsheets and financial models, finding patterns in data that told stories nobody else could see. There was a meditation to it, a purity in numbers that didn't care about the color of my skin or the texture of my hair. 2 + 2 = 4, whether Mark Whitman believed in me or not. Most nights, I was the last one on the floor besides the cleaning crew. Rosa, who emptied the trash bins, and I had developed our own little ritual. She'd stop by my desk around 7:30, and we'd chat in a mixture of English and my broken Spanish about her grandkids, her garden, her life. She never asked why I stayed so late. I think she understood that some of us had to work twice as hard to get half as far. I'd finally leave around 8 p.m., drive back to my apartment in East Atlanta, a modest 1-bedroom that I decorated with plants and bookshelves because if I couldn't control my career trajectory, I could at least control my living space and I'd pour myself a glass of wine, just one. Then I'd sit on my small balcony, listen to the city sounds, and wonder if tomorrow would be the day things finally changed. It never was. My friends didn't understand why I stayed. Girl with your skills? My best friend Shanice would say during our Sunday brunches. You could work anywhere. But it wasn't that simple. TechVance looked good on a resume. The benefits were decent. And somewhere deep down, in a place I didn't like to examine too closely, I still believed that if I just proved myself one more time, they'd finally see me. My parents, both retired teachers who'd fought their own battles against systemic racism in the Georgia public school system, were more measured in their advice. Baby, my father would say during our weekly phone calls, you can't make blind people see, but you can make sure you're ready when the right opportunity comes along. I thought I was ready. God, did I think I was ready? By the time I hit my 8th year at TechVance, I'd contributed to projects worth over $50 million. I'd identified cost-saving measures that added millions to the bottom line. I'd mentored junior analysts who'd all gone on to be promoted past me. My performance reviews were immaculate, always. Exceeds expectations, always demonstrates strong analytical abilities, always valuable team member, but never leadership material. That phrase showed up in my reviews like clockwork, always in the areas for development section. Imani would benefit from developing her executive presence. Imani should work on being more visible in strategic discussions. The subtext was clear. You're good at the work, but you don't look like a leader. You don't sound like a leader. You're not what we picture when we think of someone in charge. What they meant was, you're not a white man. I knew this. Of course I knew this. I'd known it since my first week when Mark had introduced me to a client as the girl who handles our numbers while introducing Bradley as one of our strategic thinkers. I'd known it every time my ideas were ignored in meetings, until a male colleague repeated them verbatim. I'd known it every time I watched men with half my experience speak with twice my confidence and get rewarded for it. But knowing something and accepting it are two different things. And I wasn't ready to accept that this was all I'd ever be, the invisible engine keeping everything running, while other people got to drive. So when the email came through about the sector lead position opening up, something shifted in me. This wasn't just another senior analyst role or a lateral move with a fancier title. This was real leadership, budget authority, team management, strategic decision-making power. This was the role I'd been preparing for since day one, even if nobody else realized it. I spent a weekend crafting my application, not just updating my resume, but building a comprehensive proposal for how I'd transform the sector. I outlined inefficiencies I'd noticed, proposed new client engagement strategies, and included a 5-year growth plan backed by detailed financial projections. It was, without false modesty, the best piece of professional writing I'd ever produced. Monday morning, I dressed in my best suit, a charcoal gray Ann Taylor piece I'd splurged on, specifically for moments like this, and I walked into Mark Whitman's office with my head high and my proposal printed on premium paper. I should have known better. Should have recognized the way his expression changed when I said I was applying for the position. Not quite a smirk, but close. I should have noticed how he barely glanced at my proposal before setting it aside. I should have prepared myself for what was coming, but I was still operating under the delusion that merit mattered. That excellence would speak for itself, that this time finally would be different. It wasn't. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 2 p.m. Mark's assistant, a nervous young white woman named Ashley who always seemed apologetic for existing, sent me a calendar invite with the subject line, Sector Lead Discussion. I read those 3 words at least 20 times, each reading feeding a different emotion: hope, anxiety, determination, fear. I told myself this was it. This was my moment. 8 years of invisible labor were about to pay off. I prepared like I was going to trial. I rehearsed answers to every possible question, memorized key statistics, and even practiced my posture in the bathroom mirror. Confident, but not aggressive. Assertive, but not threatening. It was exhausting, this constant calibration of how to present myself so that my competence didn't come across as intimidation, so that my confidence didn't read as arrogance. White men never had to think about these things. They just showed up and assumed they belonged. That Thursday, I skipped lunch. My stomach was too knotted to eat anyway. At 1:45 p.m., I gathered my materials, my proposal, a tablet with supplementary data, and a leather portfolio my mother had given me when I graduated. For when they finally recognize what they have, she'd said. I ran my fingers over the smooth leather and whispered a prayer. Please, God, let this be that moment. Mark's office was on the 15th floor, one level up from where the rest of us worked. That single floor might as well have been a different universe. Thicker carpet, real art on the walls instead of motivational posters, and a silence that spoke of power and decisions being made behind closed doors. His assistant gestured for me to go in, and I entered with my best professional smile. Mark was behind his desk, a massive thing made of dark wood that seemed designed to remind visitors of their place. He wasn't alone. Two other executives sat in the chairs facing his desk: Richard Park, VP of Client Relations, and Susan Mitchell, HR Director. My heart sank a little. I'd expected a one-on-one conversation, but this was a panel. This was formal. "Imani, come in, sit down," Mark said, gesturing to the remaining empty chair. His tone was casual, almost bored, like I was there to discuss office supplies rather than my career trajectory. I sat, crossed my ankles, never my legs. I'd read somewhere that ankle crossing projected more professionalism, and placed my portfolio on my lap. "Thank you for meeting with me about the sector lead position. I've prepared a comprehensive—" "Let me stop you there," Mark interrupted, holding up one hand. He had large hands, I noticed. Hands that had never had to work for anything they held. "We wanted to have this conversation with you because, well, we value transparency here at TechVance. Transparency." The word tasted bitter even though I hadn't spoken it. Companies that truly valued transparency didn't need to announce it. "We've reviewed your application," Susan said, her voice taking on that particular tone HR directors use when they're about to disappoint you but want you to know it's nothing personal. "Your technical skills are, as always, exemplary." There it was. The but was coming. I could feel it approaching like a storm. "But," Richard continued, right on cue, "we have some concerns about whether this role aligns with your current skill set." My current skill set, as if I hadn't been doing half the sector lead's job already, just without the title or the salary. "I appreciate your feedback," I said, keeping my voice level. "Could you elaborate on which specific skills you feel need development? I've included in my proposal several examples of leadership initiatives I've already undertaken, including—" "It's not about specific skills," Mark cut in. He leaned back in his chair, his body language radiating a casual dismissiveness that made my jaw clench. "It's about presence, executive presence. Leadership isn't just about being good with numbers, Imani. It's about commanding a room, making tough calls, having that certain authority. Authority." That word, coming from him, in that moment, carried so much weight. What he meant was, you're not what a leader looks like to us. You're not what we've been conditioned to see when we picture someone in charge. "I understand executive presence is important," I replied, fighting to keep the edge out of my voice. "In my 8 years here, I've consistently demonstrated leadership by mentoring junior analysts, managing client relationships, and—" "That's support work," Richard interrupted. "Important support work, don't get me wrong. But leadership is different. It's about vision, strategy, big picture thinking." Big picture thinking. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. I'd written the strategic vision for 3 major client accounts. I'd identified market opportunities that generated millions in revenue. But those wins had been quietly absorbed into company achievements, never attributed to me specifically. "I've prepared detailed strategic proposals," I tried again, my fingers tightening on my portfolio. "If you'd be willing to review—" "Imani." Mark's voice changed then, taking on a tone that was almost pitying. That was worse than contempt. Pity meant he didn't even see me as a threat. "Look, you're great at what you do. You're reliable, thorough, excellent with the analytical work. But we need someone who can operate at a different level for this role. Someone who can walk into a boardroom and own it. Someone who—" He trailed off, but his eyes completed the sentence. "Someone who looks like us." The room felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. Susan was looking at her hands. Richard was checking his phone. Neither of them would meet my eyes. They were embarrassed for me, I realized. Embarrassed that I'd put them in this position, that I'd forced them to say out loud what was usually communicated through silent rejections and closed doors. "Someone who what?" I asked quietly. I shouldn't have. I should have thanked them for their time and left with whatever dignity I could salvage. But something in me snapped. 8 years of swallowed words came pushing up my throat. Someone who can own a room? I've been owning rooms in this building for years. Someone with vision? I've identified opportunities you didn't even know existed. Someone with strategic thinking? The last 3 major accounts we landed were based on proposals I wrote. See, this is exactly what I mean. Mark said, and there was an edge to his voice now. I'd irritated him. I'd stepped out of my place. This defensiveness, this inability to take constructive feedback. Leadership requires emotional maturity, Imani. It requires knowing when to listen instead of arguing. My mouth went dry. He was making me the problem. My valid pushback against his vague dismissals was being reframed as an attitude issue, proof that I couldn't handle leadership pressure. I'm not being defensive, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. I'm trying to understand what specific competencies you feel I'm lacking so I can address them. It's not about specific competencies, Susan said gently, like she was talking to a child. It's about fit, culture fit, leadership fit. Sometimes people are better suited for roles that play to their strengths, roles that play to my strengths. She meant stay in your lane, keep being the workhorse, let other people be the show horses. Mark sighed, a long-suffering sound that suggested I was taking up too much of his valuable time. Look, I'm going to be frank with you, Imani, because I think you need to hear this. He leaned forward, elbows on his desk, and looked me dead in the eye. You're not leadership material. You're a solid individual contributor, and there's no shame in that. Not everyone is meant to lead. Some people are better suited to support those who do. The words hit me like a physical blow. Not leadership material. After everything I'd done, everything I'd sacrificed, every late night and weekend and holiday I'd worked while he golfed with clients, I wasn't leadership material. I don't remember what I said next. Something polite and professional, probably. Something about appreciating their time and consideration. My body went on autopilot, performing the social niceties expected of me while my mind reeled. I stood up. Shook hands. The whole thing probably lasted less than 15 minutes. 15 minutes to dismiss 8 years of my life. I walked out of that office with my head high, my spine straight, my face carefully neutral. I smiled at Ashley as I passed. I pressed the elevator button. I descended 1 floor. I walked through the sea of cubicles where my colleagues pretended to be absorbed in their work, while definitely tracking my movement with their peripheral vision. I sat down at my desk, placed my portfolio carefully in the bottom drawer, and stared at my computer screen. My reflection stared back, a black woman who'd been naive enough to think merit mattered in a system designed to keep people like her in their place. My hands didn't shake. Not yet. I was too numb for that. The email came 3 days later. Sunday evening, which should have been my time, my sanctuary from work. But corporate America doesn't respect boundaries. Especially not when it wants to twist the knife. Announcement: Derrick Fields promoted to sector lead. I read the subject line 3 times before I could bring myself to open the message. When I did, Mark's words filled the screen with enthusiastic corporate speak about Derrick's innovative thinking and natural leadership abilities and exciting vision for the sector's future. Derrick Fields, 30 years old, hired 18 months ago, reported to me for his first 6 months because he didn't understand our financial modeling systems, still came to my desk at least twice a week with questions he should have figured out by now. Derrick was a nice guy. That was the thing that made it almost worse. He wasn't Mark. He wasn't actively malicious. He was just there. Charming, sure. Good with clients, definitely. He had that easy confidence that came from never having to prove himself, from growing up knowing the world was designed for people like him. I'd trained him. I'd literally trained him. And now he was my boss. My phone buzzed. A text from Shanice. Girl, did you see the email? Are you okay? I wasn't okay. I was the opposite of okay, but I typed back, I'm fine. Talk tomorrow. Then I opened a blank document and started typing my resignation letter. The cursor blinked at me like a heartbeat. Steady, insistent, waiting for me to put words to the storm raging inside my chest. Dear Mr. Dawson, I typed, then immediately deleted it. Too formal. To whom it may concern. Delete. Too cold. I am writing to inform you of my resignation. Delete, delete, delete. How do you put 8 years of your life into a letter? How do you explain that you're not just leaving a job, but fleeing the scene of a slow-motion death, the death of your dreams, your belief in meritocracy, your faith that hard work would be enough. I closed my laptop and walked to the kitchen. Poured that glass of wine I'd promised myself I'd limit to one, then poured another. The Merlot tasted like giving up, and I hated myself for drinking it. My grandmother had raised me better than this. Brooks women don't quit, she used to say, her voice carrying the weight of ancestors who'd survived, worse than a corporate rejection. But Grandma hadn't. Worked in a glass tower where your worth was determined by how closely you resembled the portrait of the founding fathers hanging in the lobby. She'd cleaned houses, raised 5 children, and put 2 of them through college on a maid's salary. She'd fought different battles, in different times, with different weapons. What would she tell me now? I wondered, staring at the amber liquid in my glass. Would she tell me to stay and fight? Or would she tell me that some battles aren't worth the pieces of yourself you lose in the fighting? Monday morning came too quickly. I dressed in a simple navy dress, not my best suit, not anymore, because what was the point? And made the familiar drive to the office. The city looked different somehow. Or maybe I was different. Maybe I was finally seeing Atlanta for what it had always been. A city that preached progress while practicing the same old exclusions with better PR. Marcus greeted me at the security desk with his usual smile. "Morning, Ms. Brooks. You look tired. Everything all right?" I appreciated that he asked. Marcus always asked. "Long weekend," I said, which was true enough. I'd spent most of it oscillating between rage writing resignation letters and rage deleting them. The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt longer than usual. When the doors opened, I was greeted by a sight that made my stomach turn. A small crowd gathered near the conference room, champagne flutes in hand. A banner hung across the doorway. "Congratulations, Derrick." They were throwing him a celebration. Of course they were. The golden boy deserved a party for receiving what should have been mine. I tried to slip past unnoticed, but Mark's voice boomed across the floor. "Imani! Come join us. We're celebrating our new sector lead." Every head turned toward me. I felt their eyes. Some sympathetic, some curious, some studiously avoiding mine. This was a test, I realized. Mark wanted to see if I'd be a good sport. If I'd smile and congratulate Derrick and prove that I was a team player despite being passed over. I thought about turning around and walking straight to HR to submit my resignation right then. But that would be letting Mark win. That would be giving him the satisfaction of breaking me. So I walked toward the conference room, my heels clicking against the floor with each measured step. I accepted a champagne flute from Ashley, who looked like she wanted to apologize but didn't know how. I found myself standing at the edge of the crowd, watching Derrick bask in attention he hadn't earned. He looked good, I had to admit. Designer suit, fresh haircut, that megawatt smile that probably helped land half our clients. He was giving a speech about how honored he was, how he couldn't have done it without the amazing team, how he looked forward to leading everyone to new heights. "And I especially want to thank Imani," he said, and my head snapped up. He was looking directly at me now, his expression earnest. "Imani, you've been such a mentor to me since I started. Your knowledge of our systems, your analytical skills, they're unmatched. I'm really looking forward to working with you in my new role. Working with me, not learning from me, not acknowledging that I should be standing where he was standing. Just a casual thank you that positioned me as his helper, his support staff, the person who made his success possible while remaining in the shadows." The room applauded. I raised my glass in acknowledgement, my face arranged in what I hoped looked like a smile. Inside, something crystallized. This was it. This was the moment I knew, with absolute certainty, that I couldn't stay. The celebration eventually dispersed, people returning to their desks with the slight buzz of mid-morning champagne. I went to my corner, logged into my computer, and opened my email. There were already 3 messages from Derrick, sent at 7 a.m., questions about reports, requests for background information, asking if I could catch him up on various accounts. He'd been promoted for less than a week and was already leaning on me to do his job. I should have ignored the emails. Should have let him flounder. But that's not who I was. I'd been conditioned my entire life to be helpful, to be accommodating, to make things easier for everyone around me even when no one returned the favor. So I responded. Professionally, thoroughly, attaching the documents he needed and explaining the context he should have already known. Because even in my anger, even in my hurt, I couldn't bring myself to sabotage him. It would only reflect poorly on me. "Hey, Imani." I looked up to find Derrick standing at my cubicle entrance, hands in his pockets, looking sheepish. Up close, I could see he was nervous. Good, he should be. "Thanks for those files," he said. "Listen, I know this is awkward. The promotion and everything, awkward." That's what he was calling it. Not unjust, not wrong. Awkward. "Congratulations," I said, my voice flat. "I'm sure you'll do great." He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "I was hoping we could grab coffee later. I really want to pick your brain about how to approach this role. You know this sector better than anyone. Pick my brain. Like my knowledge was free fruit hanging from a tree, available for anyone to pluck. Like the years I'd spent developing expertise were just resources for him to extract. "I'm pretty busy today," I said, turning back to my screen. "Maybe another time." He lingered for a moment longer, then left. I watched his reflection in my monitor as he walked away, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction at making him uncomfortable, no guilt for being cold. Just a vast echoing emptiness. Lunch came and went. I stayed at my desk, eating a salad I didn't taste while working on a financial projection that didn't matter. Around 2 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Shanice. "Lunch this week?" "You've been dodging me," she was right. I'd been avoiding everyone outside of work, afraid that if I talked about what happened, I'd break down completely. But I couldn't hide forever. "Thursday?" I typed back. "Perfect." "And Imani? Whatever you're feeling, it's valid. Don't let them make you doubt that." I stared at those words for a long time. Valid. Such a simple word, but it carried weight. My anger was valid. My hurt was valid. My desire to leave was valid. That evening, I stayed late again. Not because I had urgent work, but because I couldn't face going home to an empty apartment where I'd just spiral. Around 7 p.m., most of the floor had cleared out. I was deep in a report when I heard footsteps approaching. "You're here late." Derrick again, carrying his laptop bag, looking like he was finally heading out. "Just finishing something up," I said without looking at him. "Listen, Imani." He set his bag down and leaned against the edge of my desk. Too familiar. Too comfortable in a space that wasn't his. "I wanted to talk to you, like, really talk. I know I'm not the most qualified person for this role." That got my attention. I looked up at him, surprised by the admission. He ran a hand over his fade, a nervous gesture I recognized from the many times I'd watched him present to clients. "I'm not stupid, okay? I know you should have gotten this position. Everyone knows it. But Mark offered it to me and I didn't know what to say. How do you turn down an opportunity like that?" "You say no," I replied quietly. "You say, actually, Imani Brooks has been doing this work for years and deserves this role? That's what you say." He had the decency to look ashamed. "I thought about it. I swear I did. But this is my career too, you know? And Mark made it clear that if I didn't take it, he'd give it to someone from outside the company. So at least this way, you and I can work together, and I can make sure you get credit for—" "I don't want credit," I interrupted, my voice harder now. "I don't want to work under someone I trained. I don't want to be the invisible engine making you look good while you get the recognition and the salary increase. I've been doing that for 8 years, Derrick. I'm done." His eyes widened. "You're leaving?" I hadn't meant to say it out loud, but now that the words were out there, they felt right. "Yeah, I'm leaving." "Imani, wait. You can't leave. The sector needs you. I need you. At least give me a chance to— To what? To prove you deserve the role? You don't. We both know it." I stood up, gathering my things. "But that's not your fault, really. The system's broken. You're just the latest person to benefit from it." I left him standing there, walked to the elevator, and didn't look back. That night, I finally finished the resignation letter. No long explanations, no emotional outpouring. Just professional, clean, and effective. "Dear Mr. Dawson, Please accept this letter as my formal resignation from TechVance Solutions, effective 2 weeks from today. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute to the company's success over the past 8 years. Sincerely, Imani Brooks. I saved it to my desktop. Tomorrow, I'd submit it. Tomorrow, I'd start the process of extracting myself from this place that had taken so much from me and given back so little. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. The resignation letter sat in my drafts folder for 3 days. Not because I was having second thoughts, but because I wanted to savor it. Every time I opened my laptop and saw it there, complete, polished, ready to detonate, I felt a small thrill of power. For once, I was the one making a decision about my future. For once, I wasn't waiting for someone else to determine my worth. I'd decided to submit it on Friday. There was something poetic about ending my time at TechVance right before the weekend, giving them 2 days to panic about how they'd replace me before I had to face them again on Monday. But Wednesday changed everything. It started with the phones. At 9:47 a.m., every line on the floor seemed to ring simultaneously. Not unusual during busy season, but there was a quality to the chaos that felt different, more frantic, more urgent. I looked up from my report to see colleagues rushing between cubicles, voices raised, stress radiating through the open office like a contagion. Then I heard Mark's voice, louder than I'd ever heard it, shouting from the 15th floor. "Where the hell is Fields? Someone get Derrick in here now." My stomach tightened. Whatever was happening, it wasn't good. Jennifer Rodriguez appeared at my cubicle, her normally composed face tight with worry. "Imani, have you seen the Hartwell account numbers?" Hartwell Industries was our biggest client, a manufacturing giant that represented nearly 30% of our sector's revenue. I'd been managing their financial projections for 6 years before Derrick's promotion. "What about them?" "They're threatening to pull their contract." Apparently, the quarterly forecast Derrick submitted was off by almost 40%. "They're accusing us of incompetence, maybe fraud. Their CEO is on a call with Mark right now, and it's not going well." My heart sank. I'd built the Hartwell relationship from the ground up, nurturing it through 3 CEO transitions and 2 recessions. And Derrick had destroyed it in less than 2 weeks. How did the forecast get so wrong? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Jennifer lowered her voice. "Between you and me, Derrick used last year's model without accounting for the new tariff regulations or their expansion into the Southeast market. Rookie mistake. The kind of mistake someone who actually understood the account would never make. The kind of mistake I would never make." Over the next hour, the crisis escalated. Hartwell wasn't our only problem. Mitchell & Sons, another major account, had received projections with similar errors. So had Cornerstone Logistics. It turned out that Derrick, overwhelmed and underprepared, had been using outdated templates and making assumptions that showed a fundamental misunderstanding of our clients' business models. The sector was hemorrhaging credibility, and with it, revenue. I watched from my desk as Derrick was summoned to Mark's office 3 separate times. Each time he emerged, he looked paler, more shaken. The third time, I heard him on the phone, his voice cracking. I don't know what happened. I followed the standard procedures. He thought it would be easy. He thought leadership was just a title, not a skill set built over years of grinding, detailed work. He thought he could coast on charisma and figure it out as he went along. He was learning, in the most brutal way possible, that he couldn't. By 2 p.m., the entire floor knew we were in crisis mode. Mark sent out an emergency email calling for an all-hands meeting at 4 p.m. The mood was funeral. People spoke in hushed tones, avoided eye contact, and anxiety hung in the air like smoke. I should have felt vindicated. This was karma, wasn't it? The universe proving that I'd been right all along, that Derrick wasn't ready, that they should have chosen me. But instead, I felt a heavy sadness. These were accounts I'd built, relationships I'd cultivated, client trust I'd earned over years of flawless work. Watching it all crumble because of someone else's incompetence hurt more than I'd expected. At 3:47 p.m., 13 minutes before the meeting, Derrick appeared at my desk. He looked terrible, tie loosened, hair disheveled, eyes rimmed with red. For a moment I thought he might cry. Imani. His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. I need your help. I stared at him, my expression neutral. With what? With everything. The accounts are falling apart. Hartwell is this close to walking. He held up 2 fingers pinched together. Mitchell & Sons is talking to our competitors. Mark is losing his mind. He paused, swallowing hard. I don't know how to fix this. There it was. The admission I'd been waiting for, though it tasted more bitter than sweet. You should have thought about that before you took a job you weren't qualified for, I said quietly. I know. He pulled up a chair without asking, sitting heavily beside my desk. I know, okay? You were right. I'm in way over my head. But this isn't just about me anymore. If these accounts leave, it affects everyone on this floor. Jobs are at risk. The whole sector could go under. He wasn't wrong. TechVance's leadership might be incompetent, but the analysts, coordinators, and junior staff who'd had nothing to do with this decision would pay the price. People like Jennifer, like Marcus downstairs, like Rosa who cleaned the offices at night, they'd lose their jobs while Mark and his executive team would probably just move to another company with golden parachutes, intact. What exactly are you asking me to do? I asked, though I already knew. Help me fix the forecasts. You know these accounts better than anyone. You built most of these relationships. If anyone can salvage this, it's you. He looked at me with desperate eyes. Please, Imani, I'm begging you. Begging. The man who'd taken my job was begging me to save him from the consequences of his own inadequacy. I should have said no. Every fiber of my being screamed to let him fail, to let them all see what happened when they overlooked the person who'd been holding everything together. This was my chance to prove, once and for all, that I was indispensable. But there was a problem with that logic. Proving you're indispensable by letting everything burn doesn't actually help you. It just makes you the person who stood by while Rome fell. And despite everything, despite the anger, the hurt, the injustice, I wasn't that person. I'll help, I said finally. But not for you, for the people on this floor who don't deserve to lose their jobs because of Mark's incompetence. Relief flooded his face. Thank you. God, thank you, Imani. I won't forget this. Yes, you will, I said matter-of-factly. But that's not why I'm doing it. The all-hands meeting was a disaster. Mark stood at the front of the conference room, his face red, his voice sharp as he detailed the crisis without once acknowledging his own role in creating it. He talked about unforeseen challenges, and market volatility, and the need for everyone to step up, all corporate euphemisms for we promoted the wrong person, and now we're all paying for it. Derrick sat in the front row, looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Mark didn't mention him by name, but everyone knew who was responsible. I could see colleagues glancing at Derrick, then at me, then back at Derrick. The math wasn't hard to do. After the meeting, I went straight to work. I pulled the Hartwell files, the Mitchell & Sons projections, the Cornerstone data, all the accounts that were threatening to leave. I worked through dinner, sustained by coffee and the grim determination that had gotten me through every other impossible situation in my career. Around 8 p.m., Derrick appeared with takeout. I figured you hadn't eaten, he said, setting a container of pad thai on my desk. It's from that place on Peachtree you mentioned once. I was surprised he'd remembered. Thanks. He pulled up a chair, and for the next 4 hours we worked side by side. I showed him where he'd gone wrong, not cruelly, but clinically. Each mistake was a teaching moment, each error an opportunity to explain the complexity he'd underestimated. I didn't realize how much went into these projections, he admitted around midnight, rubbing his eyes. When you made it look easy, I just thought, I don't know what I thought. That's the problem with invisible labor, I said, updating a spreadsheet. When someone does a job well, it looks effortless. People forget that effortless is usually the result of years of effort. He was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry, Imani, for real. Not just for the promotion, but for not seeing what you were doing. For taking advantage of your willingness to help. It was a better apology than I'd expected. Not enough to undo the damage, but enough to crack the shell of anger I'd been carrying. Apology noted, I said. Now help me double-check these tariff calculations. We worked until 2 a.m. By the time I finally left the office, we had a plan. It wasn't perfect. There was too much damage to fix everything overnight. But it was a start. If I could get to Hartwell's CFO before they made a final decision, if I could walk them through the corrected projections personally, maybe I could save the account. Maybe. I drove home through empty Atlanta streets, my mind racing despite my body's exhaustion. The resignation letter was still sitting in my drafts folder, unopened, unsent. But now, for the first time since I'd written it, I wondered if I should actually send it. Because something had shifted in those 4 hours of working beside Derrick. Not forgiveness, I wasn't ready for that. But a recognition that maybe, just maybe, there was still a reason to stay. Not for Mark. Not for Derrick. But for the work itself. For the accounts I'd built. For the proof that I could do what everyone else had failed to do. I fell asleep at 3 a.m. with my laptop still open beside me, spreadsheets glowing in the dark. I woke up at 5:30 a.m. with my neck cramped from falling asleep at an awkward angle and my laptop battery dead beside me. For a moment, I lay there in the pre-dawn darkness, my mind foggy with exhaustion. Then reality crashed back. Hartwell, Mitchell & Sons, Cornerstone. The entire sector teetering on the edge of collapse. I had 48 hours to save accounts that had taken me years to build. I showered in under 5 minutes, threw on the first professional outfit I could find, a black sheath dress and blazer that said, business, and was out the door by 6:15. The sunrise painted Atlanta in shades of pink and gold as I drove, the city still sleepy and quiet. It felt surreal, this calm before the storm I was about to walk into. When I arrived at the office at 6:42, I wasn't surprised to find Derrick already there. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. Same clothes as yesterday, 5 o'clock shadow creeping across his jaw, eyes bloodshot and desperate. "I've been calling Hartwell's CFO since 5 a.m., he said without preamble. "He won't take my calls. His assistant says he's in meetings, but we both know that's code for, we're done with you." "Did you try his personal cell?" I asked, setting down my bag and immediately pulling up my contact list. "I don't have his personal cell." Of course he didn't. Building relationships meant more than schmoozing at golf outings and expensive dinners. It meant years of consistent, reliable service that earned you access to the numbers that mattered. "I do," I said simply. "Give me 20 minutes to review the corrected projections one more time. Then I'll call him." "Imani, it's not even 7 a.m. You can't call a CFO at our Robert Martinez gets to his home office at 6:45 every morning. He drinks 2 espressos while reviewing overnight market reports, and by 7 a.m. he's ready for calls. I know this because I've been managing his account for 6 years. Trust me." Derrick fell silent, and I could see the realization washing over him. He didn't actually know these clients. He knew their company names, their contract values, their revenue potential. But he didn't know them, their habits, their preferences, the small details that transformed a business relationship into a partnership. At 7:03 a.m., I dialed Robert Martinez's personal cell. He answered on the second ring. "Imani Brooks." His voice was cold, clipped. "I was wondering if you'd call. Mr. Martinez, I want to apologize for the projections you received. They didn't meet the standard you've come to expect from us. And more importantly, they didn't meet the standard I hold myself to." "You didn't prepare those projections," he said flatly. "Your new sector lead did, and they were, to put it mildly, a disaster. We're seriously considering moving our account to Friedman & Associates. Friedman & Associates, our biggest competitor. If Hartwell went to them, others would follow. It would be a bloodbath." "I understand your frustration," I said, keeping my voice calm and professional. "But before you make that decision, I'd like to walk you through the corrected projections myself. I've spent the last 18 hours rebuilding the forecast from the ground up, accounting for the new tariff regulations, your Southeast expansion, and the market volatility we discussed last quarter. I can be in your office in 40 minutes with a complete presentation." There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing, considering. Finally, "You have 30 minutes of my time, Imani. That's it. And if these numbers aren't perfect, we're done." "They will be. I'll see you at 8 a.m. I hung up and immediately started gathering materials. Derrick watched me, his expression somewhere between awe and despair. "What do I do?" he asked. "You stay here and start damage control on Mitchell & Sons. Use the template I created last night. It's in the shared folder." "And Derrick?" I paused at the door. "Don't improvise. Follow the template exactly." The meeting with Robert Martinez was one of the most intense 90 minutes of my professional life. What started as a 30-minute courtesy call turned into a deep dive through every aspect of Hartwell's financial relationship with TechVance. Robert brought in his VP of Operations and their Chief Strategy Officer, and together they grilled me on projections, methodologies, risk assessments, and growth strategies. I didn't just answer their questions, I anticipated them. When Robert asked about supply chain disruptions, I had data on alternative vendors. When the CSO questioned our market analysis, I pulled up comparative studies I'd prepared months ago. When the VP wanted to know how we'd prevent this kind of error in the future, I outlined a quality control process that would have caught Derrick's mistakes before they ever reached a client. By 9:30 a.m., the atmosphere in the room had shifted. Robert leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "This is the TechVance I remember. This is the level of service we've come to expect. And this is the level of service you'll continue to receive," I assured him. "I give you my personal word." "Your personal word means something to me, Imani. It always has." He glanced at his colleagues, who both nodded. "All right, we'll stay with TechVance, but I want you personally overseeing our account going forward. Not your new sector lead. You." I should have said that wasn't possible, that Derrick was technically my supervisor now, that chain of command mattered. But in that moment, I didn't care about corporate hierarchy. I cared about saving the work I'd built. "You have my commitment," I said. When I returned to the office at 11 a.m., there was a small crowd gathered near my desk. Jennifer, Bradley, even a few people from other sectors. Word had spread that I'd saved the Hartwell account. As I walked through, people actually applauded. It was surreal, this sudden visibility after years of being overlooked. "Imani," Jennifer rushed over, her face bright with relief. "Mitchell & Sons just agreed to a call this afternoon. They said they'll only talk to you." "Cornerstone too," Bradley added. "Their CEO specifically requested you." I looked at Derrick, who stood off to the side, his expression complicated. There was relief there. These accounts weren't dead yet, but also something else. The dawning realization that he was watching me do the job he'd been given, watching me succeed where he'd failed. The rest of the day was a blur of phone calls, presentations, and crisis management. I worked through lunch, through the afternoon coffee crash, through the moment my feet started screaming in my heels. By 6 p.m., I'd personally spoken with every major client that had threatened to leave. By 8 p.m., I'd secured commitments from all of them to stay, on the condition that I remained their primary point of contact. Around 9 p.m., as I was finally packing up my things, I noticed that people were still at their desks, not working, watching me. There was something different in their eyes now. Not pity, not sympathy. Respect. Maybe even a little awe. Imani. Susan Mitchell from HR appeared at my cubicle, which was unusual. HR directors didn't typically descend from their 15th floor offices to chat with individual contributors. "Do you have a moment?" We stepped into one of the small conference rooms. Susan closed the door and turned to face me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I've been with this company for 12 years, she said without preamble. In that time, I've seen a lot of promotions, a lot of leadership changes. Some work out, some don't. But I've never seen anything quite like what happened today." I waited, unsure where this was going. "You saved this sector, Imani, single-handedly, while officially being just a senior analyst." She shook her head. "The CEO has been briefed on the situation. He's coming to the office tomorrow to assess the damage and determine next steps." My stomach dropped. Frederick Dawson, the CEO and founder, rarely visited individual offices. He operated from the executive suite downtown, appearing only for major announcements or major problems. This was definitely the latter. "I wanted to give you a heads up," Susan continued. "Mr. Dawson will want to speak with everyone involved. That includes you and Imani. Be honest with him. Tell him everything, not just about this week, but about everything that led up to it." She left before I could respond, and I stood alone in the conference room, my reflection staring back at me from the darkened windows. Somewhere in the last 48 hours, something fundamental had shifted. I'd stopped being invisible. The question was, what would that visibility cost me? I drove home that night too exhausted to think clearly. But as I lay in bed, one thought kept circling through my mind. My resignation letter was still sitting in my drafts folder, unsent. Did I still want to leave? Could I leave, now that I'd proven what everyone should have known all along? Or had I just made myself indispensable to a system that would never truly value me? I fell asleep before I could answer those questions. My dreams filled with spreadsheets and conference rooms and a faceless CEO asking questions I didn't know how to answer. But when I woke up Thursday morning, one thing was crystal clear. Frederick Dawson was coming, and nothing would ever be the same again. Frederick Dawson arrived at 10 a.m. sharp on Thursday morning, and you could feel the shift in energy the moment his car pulled into the executive parking garage. It was like when a storm front moves in, the air pressure changes, everything goes still, and you know something significant is about to happen. I'd seen him before, of course. At company-wide meetings, in corporate videos, in the glossy annual reports that HR distributed to make us all feel part of something bigger than ourselves. But I'd never been in the same room with him, never been close enough to understand why people spoke his name with a mixture of reverence and fear. Frederick Dawson was a legend in Atlanta's business community. A black man who'd built TechVance from nothing in the early 2000s, growing it from a 3-person startup in his garage to a multi-million-dollar operation with offices in 6 states. He'd been profiled in Forbes, spoken at conferences, mentored dozens of young black entrepreneurs. He was everything I'd aspired to be when I'd started this job 8 years ago. Proof that excellence and hard work could overcome the barriers that tried to keep people like us out. But he was also, by all accounts, exacting and unforgiving when it came to incompetence or injustice within his company. Stories circulated about executives who'd been fired on the spot for ethical violations, about entire departments reorganized after a single visit revealed systemic problems. If Frederick Dawson was coming to investigate, heads would roll. The question was, whose? At 9:47 a.m., I was at my desk pretending to work on a report while actually watching the elevator bank like a hawk. Around me, the entire floor hummed with nervous energy. People had dressed up. Better suits, fresh haircuts, the kind of polish usually reserved for client meetings. Even Mark Whitman had shown up early, pacing the 15th floor like a caged animal. When the elevator doors finally opened and Frederick Dawson stepped out, accompanied by 2 assistants and Susan Mitchell, the ambient noise level dropped to almost nothing. He was exactly as he appeared in photos, tall, imposing, with the kind of presence that filled a room without him having to say a word. Bald head, reading glasses hanging from a chain around his neck, charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. But it was his eyes that struck me. Sharp, assessing, missing nothing. He scanned the floor with those eyes, taking in the rows of cubicles, the nervous employees, the tension crackling through the air. Then his gaze landed on me, and for just a moment, our eyes met. I felt seen in a way I hadn't been in 8 years. "Not looked at, seen, Ms. Mitchell?" His voice carried despite not being raised. "Let's begin with the senior leadership. I want to understand exactly how this situation developed." They disappeared into the conference room, Mark, Richard Park, Susan, and Frederick Dawson. Through the glass walls, I could see Mark gesturing animatedly, clearly in damage control mode. Richard looked pale. Susan took notes with mechanical precision. The rest of us waited. Jennifer brought me coffee I didn't ask for but appreciated. Bradley stopped by to ask if I was okay, which was the first time he'd voluntarily spoken to me in months. Even Derrick kept his distance, sitting at his new office, Mark's old space 1 floor up, looking like a man waiting for an execution. The first meeting lasted 90 minutes. When the door finally opened, Mark emerged looking like he'd aged 5 years. His face was flushed, his tie askew, and he walked past us without making eye contact with anyone. Richard followed, equally shaken. Susan was the last to exit, and she caught my eye with a slight nod before heading toward the elevators. Then Frederick Dawson appeared in the doorway of the conference room. "Imani Brooks," he called out, his voice calm but authoritative. "Could you join me, please?" Every head on the floor swiveled toward me. I stood, smoothed down my dress, the same black sheath from yesterday, because I'd been too exhausted last night to plan ahead, and walked toward the conference room on legs that felt steadier than they had any right to be. The room still smelled like Mark's cologne and fear. Frederick Dawson gestured to a chair across from him. His 2 assistants had left. It was just the 2 of us and the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over Atlanta's skyline. "Ms. Brooks?" he began, settling into his chair with the ease of someone who'd spent a lifetime in boardrooms. "I've spent the last hour hearing various accounts of what happened this week. Now I'd like to hear yours. And please," he held up a hand, "I want the whole story, not the sanitized version." I took a breath. This was it. The moment where I could either play it safe, protect the status quo, keep my head down like I'd done for 8 years, or I could tell the truth and face whatever consequences came with it. "Where would you like me to start, sir?" "Start with why you applied for the sector lead position." So I told him. Not just about the application, but about the 8 years that led up to it. I told him about arriving early and leaving late, about the reports I'd written that appeared under other people's names, about the promotions I'd watched go to less qualified colleagues. I told him about the meeting with Mark, about the phrase that had haunted me for weeks. "You're not leadership material." I told him about Derrick's promotion, about my decision to resign, about the crisis that had erupted before I could leave. I told him about the 48 hours I'd spent saving accounts that I'd built, relationships I'd nurtured, work that had always been mine even if my name was never on it. I didn't editorialize. I didn't dramatize. I just laid out the facts with the same precision I brought to financial analysis, and I let those facts speak for themselves. Frederick Dawson listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. He took notes occasionally, actual handwritten notes in a leather journal, not typing on a device, and when I finally finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "How long have you been the one actually running this sector?" he asked finally. The question caught me off guard. I don't know if I'd say I was running Ms. Brooks. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "I didn't build this company by accepting false modesty or corporate doublespeak. I've spent the morning reviewing reports, examining account histories, and interviewing your colleagues. Every single person I spoke to, including Mr. Whitman, though he was reluctant to admit it, confirmed the same thing. You've been doing sector lead work for years." "So I'll ask again, how long?" I met his eyes. 3 years, maybe 4. "And in that time, what was your title?" "Senior analyst." "And your compensation?" I told him my salary. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Do you know what the sector lead position pays?" "I saw it in the job posting. About 40% more than what I make. So for 3 to 4 years, you've been doing director-level work for analyst-level pay." It wasn't a question. And when you finally applied for the position you were already performing, you were told you weren't leadership material, and the job was given to someone with 18 months of experience who you'd personally trained. Hearing it summarized like that, in his deep, authoritative voice, made the injustice of it somehow more real. I felt tears prick at my eyes and blinked them back hard. I would not cry in front of the CEO. "Yes, sir." Frederick Dawson closed his journal and removed his reading glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I'm going to tell you something, Ms. Brooks, and I want you to really hear me. I founded this company because I was tired of watching talented Black professionals get overlooked in corporate America. I built TechVance to be different, to be better, To be the kind of place where merit actually mattered. He looked out the window at the city sprawling below us. Clearly, I failed. Somewhere along the way, the very biases I was trying to escape got into my company anyway. And people like you paid the price. Mr. Dawson, let me finish. His voice was gentle but firm. I'm not telling you this to make excuses or to absolve myself of responsibility. I'm telling you this so you understand that what happened to you is not acceptable. It's not how this company is supposed to operate. And it will not continue. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Susan, please have Mr. Fields come to conference room B. He hung up and looked at me. I want you here when I speak with him. You've earned the right to witness this conversation. My heart hammered. Sir, I don't think... You don't have to say anything. Just listen. 5 minutes later, Derrick entered the conference room looking like he was walking to the gallows. When he saw me sitting there, confusion flickered across his face, followed quickly by understanding. Mr. Fields, Frederick Dawson began, and even though his tone was professional, there was steel underneath. I've been reviewing the events of this week and the circumstances of your promotion. I've spoken with Ms. Brooks, with Mr. Whitman, and with several of your colleagues. I have a clear picture now of what transpired. Derrick swallowed hard. Sir, I know I made mistakes with the accounts, but I'm working to... This isn't about mistakes, Mr. Fields. Mistakes happen. We all make them. This is about accepting a position you knew you weren't qualified for, in a system that elevated you over someone demonstrably more capable, and then relying on that person to save you from the consequences of your inadequacy. The words hung in the air like a judgment. Derrick's face went through several shades of emotion: shame, defensiveness, resignation. I'm returning you to your previous position as account manager, Frederick continued. It's not a punishment. You did good work in that role. But you're not ready for leadership, and putting you in that position was a disservice to you, to this team, and to our clients. I understand, Derrick said quietly, and to his credit, he sounded genuinely relieved. Thank you, sir. After Derrick left, Frederick turned back to me. Now let's talk about you. The conference room felt smaller suddenly, the walls closer, the air thicker. Frederick Dawson's attention was focused entirely on me now, and it was like being caught in a spotlight, illuminating, exposing, impossible to hide from. Ms. Brooks, he said, leaning back in his chair with his hands steepled in front of him. I want to be very clear about something. What happened to you was wrong. Not just unfortunate, not just an oversight. Wrong. A failure of leadership, a failure of our systems, and a failure of the values this company was supposed to embody. I nodded, not trusting my voice yet. I've looked at your performance reviews going back 8 years. Do you know what they all say? Exceeds expectations, every single one. And yet, you were passed over for promotion repeatedly while colleagues with inferior performance records moved up. He shook his head. That's not an accident. That's a pattern. And patterns don't happen without someone allowing them to continue. He pulled out his phone again and sent a text. Within seconds, Susan Mitchell entered the room, followed by another executive I recognized but had never met. Vincent Chen, the chief operating officer, and more importantly, Mark Whitman's direct superior. Thank you for joining us, Frederick said. Ms. Mitchell, Mr. Chen, I've just finished speaking with Ms. Brooks about the situation in this sector. I want you both present for what comes next because it involves significant organizational changes. My pulse quickened. Organizational changes. That phrase could mean anything from restructuring to mass layoffs. Frederick turned back to me. I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. If you could rebuild this sector from the ground up, how would you do it differently? The question caught me completely off guard. Sir, I'm not sure I understand. You've been watching this operation for 8 years. You've seen what works and what doesn't. You've identified inefficiencies that others missed. You've built client relationships that survived despite leadership failures. So tell me, if this was yours to run, what would you change? It was a test, I realized, but it was also an opportunity. Maybe the only one I'd ever get to speak truth to power without filters or fear. So I told him. I told him about the need for better quality control processes, about how reports should be peer-reviewed before reaching clients. I told him about the importance of relationship continuity, about how shuffling account managers for the sake of development opportunities damaged client trust. I told him about mentorship structures, about how junior analysts needed guided learning instead of sink or swim pressure. I told him about transparency in promotion decisions, about how vague feedback like executive presence was often code for bias. I talked for 15 minutes straight, and Frederick Dawson listened to every word, occasionally nodding, occasionally making notes, but never interrupting. When I finally finished, slightly breathless, he exchanged glances with Susan and Vincent. "Ms. Mitchell," Frederick said, "what's your assessment?" Susan consulted her notes. Ms. Brooks has essentially outlined a complete sector redesign that addresses every weakness we've identified in this crisis. More importantly, her proposals align with best practices we've been trying to implement company-wide. She clearly understands both the tactical operations and the strategic vision. "Mr. Chen?" Vincent Chen, who'd been silent until now, spoke in a measured tone. "In my 20 years in corporate operations, I've rarely seen someone with this level of insight into their own department. Ms. Brooks isn't just competent, she thinks like a leader. She sees systems, not just tasks." Frederick nodded slowly, then turned back to me. "Ms. Brooks, I'm going to make you an offer. I want you to think carefully before you respond, because this will change your career trajectory significantly." My mouth went dry. "I'm listening, sir. I'm promoting you to sector lead, effective immediately. But more than that, I'm putting you in charge of restructuring this entire operation according to the vision you just outlined. You'll have budget authority, hiring authority, and my full backing to make the changes you see fit. Your salary will be adjusted to market rate for the position, including back pay for the years you were performing director-level work at analyst wages." The room tilted slightly. I gripped the edge of the table. "Sir, I don't know what to—" "I'm not finished," he continued, his voice taking on an edge. "I'm also terminating Mark Whitman's employment with TechVance effective today. His failure to recognize talent, his apparent bias in promotion decisions, and his role in creating the crisis that nearly cost us our major accounts constitute gross negligence in leadership. He will be escorted from the building within the hour." I felt like I'd been struck by lightning. Mark Whitman fired. The man who'd laughed at my ambitions, who'd dismissed me with 6 words, who'd embodied everything broken about this system, gone. "Additionally," Frederick continued, "we'll be conducting a comprehensive review of all promotion decisions in this sector over the past 5 years. If we find other instances of qualified candidates being passed over, we'll address those as well. Ms. Mitchell will be heading that investigation." Susan nodded, already making notes. "Now," Frederick said, his expression softening slightly, "I need to ask you directly. Do you want this position? Because I won't force you to take it. You've earned the right to make your own choice about your future, and if that means leaving TechVance entirely, I'll understand. I'll even write you a recommendation letter myself." The resignation letter flashed through my mind, still sitting in my drafts folder, unsent, waiting. I'd been so ready to leave, so certain that this place would never value me. And now the CEO himself was offering me everything I'd fought for, everything I'd been denied. But was it enough? Could one promotion undo 8 years of being invisible? Could Frederick Dawson's words erase the memory of Mark's laughter, the sting of watching Derrick get what should have been mine? "Can I ask a question first?" I said quietly. "Of course. Why now? Why did it take a crisis for anyone to see what I've been doing all along? I've been excellent at my job for 8 years, Mr. Dawson. 8 years. Where were you? Where was this organizational review, this commitment to fairness, before everything almost fell apart?" The question hung in the air, more confrontational than I'd intended. Susan and Vincent shifted uncomfortably, but Frederick Dawson didn't flinch. "That's a fair question, and it deserves an honest answer." He leaned forward, his expression grave. "The truth is, I failed you. I built systems that were supposed to prevent exactly what happened to you, but I didn't monitor them closely enough. I trusted people like Mark Whitman to uphold the values I'd established, and I didn't verify that they were doing so. I was so focused on growing the company that I lost sight of the people who made that growth possible. He paused, and for the first time since I'd met him, Frederick Dawson looked vulnerable. I can't undo the 8 years you spent being overlooked. I can't give you back the opportunities you should have had or erase the frustration you must have felt. What I can do is make sure it doesn't happen again, not to you, not to anyone else in this company. And I can start by doing what should have been done years ago, putting you in the position you've already been doing. It was the most honest thing any executive had ever said to me. No corporate doublespeak, no attempts to minimize or deflect. Just acknowledgement of failure and a genuine commitment to do better. I looked at Susan Mitchell, who gave me an encouraging nod. I looked at Vincent Chen, who was watching me with an expression of professional respect I'd rarely seen directed at me. I looked at Frederick Dawson, a black man who'd built an empire and was now trying to ensure it lived up to the values that had inspired it, and I thought about my grandmother, about the battles she'd fought so that I could sit in rooms like this, about my parents who'd taught me that excellence was non-negotiable even when the world tried to tell me it didn't matter, about Rosa, the cleaning woman who worked nights to support her grandchildren, about Marcus, the security guard who always greeted me by name, about all the people who'd been rooting for me even when I didn't know it. I want the position, I said, my voice steady and clear, but I have conditions. Frederick raised an eyebrow, but there was the ghost of a smile on his face. I'm listening. First, I want a written commitment that promotion decisions in this sector will be based on documented performance metrics, not subjective assessments of leadership potential or executive presence. Second, I want funding for a mentorship program specifically for junior analysts from underrepresented backgrounds. Third, I want quarterly reviews with you personally for the first year, so there's direct accountability to the CEO level. Done, done, and done, Frederick said without hesitation. Anything else? I thought about Mark Whitman, about Derrick, about all the people who'd benefited from a system that was never designed for people like me. I want it announced. Not quietly, not in a vague email. I want every person in this company to know exactly what happened. That I was passed over despite being the most qualified candidate, that the person who was promoted failed, that I fixed the crisis, and that justice was done. I want this to be a lesson. Frederick Dawson stood and extended his hand. Ms. Brooks, you have yourself a deal. Welcome to leadership. I stood and shook his hand, his grip firm and respectful. As I did, I caught my reflection in the window. A black woman in a simple dress, no longer invisible, no longer overlooked. For the first time in 8 years, I looked like someone who belonged in this room. Because I did. Within 2 hours, the announcement went out. Not buried in a routine email, but in a company-wide message from Frederick Dawson himself, explaining the situation in frank terms that left no room for misinterpretation. The message acknowledged TechVance's failure, celebrated my contributions, and made it clear that this was a turning point for the company's commitment to fair promotion practices. My phone exploded with texts. Shanice sent about 15 messages in all caps. My parents called, my mother crying with joy. Former colleagues from other departments reached out to congratulate me. But the moment that mattered most came at 4:47 p.m. when I walked back onto the 14th floor. My floor. Now my sector, and every person stood up. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Jennifer started clapping, and then Bradley joined in. And then the whole floor erupted in applause. I stood there, overwhelmed, as my colleagues, people who'd worked beside me for years, finally saw me for who I'd always been. And in the back of the room, I saw Rosa, the cleaning woman, who must have heard the commotion and come to see what was happening. She caught my eye and smiled, then touched her heart and pointed at me. I smiled back, tears finally spilling over, because I understood what she was saying. You did it. Not just for yourself, but for all of us. My first official act as sector lead was to sit in Mark Whitman's former office, now my office, and just breathe. The space was larger than I'd imagined from the outside, all glass walls and minimalist furniture that probably cost more than my car. There was a standing desk I'd never use, a leather chair that squeaked when I sat in it, and a view of Atlanta that made the city look almost peaceful despite the chaos of evening traffic 15 floors below. But what struck me most was the silence. For 8 years, my corner of the 14th floor had hummed with ambient noise, phones ringing, colleagues chatting, the constant background static of an open office. Up here, the silence was almost oppressive. This was where decisions were made in private, where power insulated itself from the noise of the people it affected. I thought about Mark Whitman sitting in this chair, looking out at this same view and deciding I wasn't leadership material. I wondered if he'd ever actually thought about what that phrase meant, or if it was just convenient shorthand for not like me. It didn't matter now. He was gone, escorted out by security at 3:15 p.m. with his personal effects in a cardboard box like every other person who'd ever been fired. I hadn't watched. I'd been in meetings with Vincent Chen, learning about budget cycles and strategic planning, but Jennifer had texted me a play-by-play. Apparently, Mark had tried to maintain his dignity, walking out with his head high, but everyone saw the tremor in his hands as he carried that box. Part of me had expected to feel satisfaction at his downfall. Sweet revenge, justice served, karma finally catching up. But sitting in his chair, looking at his view, I felt something more complicated. Not quite pity. He'd made his choices and earned his consequences, but a kind of sadness that it had come to this. That the system was so broken it took a near catastrophe to correct itself. A knock on my glass door interrupted my thoughts. Derrick stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, looking uncertain about whether he was allowed to enter. "Come in," I said, gesturing to one of the chairs facing my desk. My desk. The phrase still felt foreign. He sat, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he cleared his throat. I wanted to apologize. For real this time, not just the panic apology when everything was falling apart. "I'm sorry, Imani, for taking the promotion, for not standing up for you, for being complicit in what happened." "You didn't make Mark pass me over," I said. "That was his decision." "Yeah, but I accepted it. I could have said no. I could have told him you deserved it more. I didn't, because—" He trailed off, struggling for words. "Because it benefited you," I finished for him. "Because in the moment, your career mattered more than doing the right thing." He flinched but nodded. "Yeah, and I have to live with that. But I want you to know, I'm going to do better, be better. I'm back in my old role and I'm actually relieved. I wasn't ready for leadership and trying to fake it was killing me. Now I can focus on learning, actually earning the next opportunity instead of having it handed to me." I studied him for a moment. Derrick wasn't a bad person. He was just a person who'd benefited from a system designed to elevate people like him, often without them even realizing it. The question was whether he'd learn from this or just wait for the next unearned opportunity. "I appreciate the apology," I said finally, "and I'm glad you're taking this as a learning experience. But Derrick, if you ever see something like this happening again, to anyone, I need you to speak up. That's the only way this changes." "I will," he promised. "I swear." After he left, I spent the next hour responding to emails. There were dozens, congratulations from colleagues, questions from clients who'd heard about the leadership change, and one message that made me pause. It was from Robert Martinez. "Hartwell Industries CFO, Imani, heard the news. About time. Looking forward to continuing our partnership with you at the helm. Also, my daughter is starting business school this fall. Would you be willing to mentor her? She's a young Black woman trying to break into finance. And after working with you all these years, I can't think of anyone better to guide her." Robert, I read the message 3 times, each time feeling a different emotion. Pride, responsibility, hope. Robert Martinez, a powerful white executive, was asking me to mentor his Black daughter because he'd seen my excellence and wanted his child to learn from it. "Yes," I typed back. "I'd be honored." The sun was setting over Atlanta now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. My phone buzzed with another text from Shanice. Dinner tomorrow to celebrate? My treat. You're buying next time with that new salary. I smiled and was about to respond when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Frederick Dawson appeared at my door, still in his suit despite the late hour. Ms. Brooks, or should I say, Sector Lead Brooks, he smiled. Mind if I come in? Of course, Mr. Dawson. He entered and stood by the window, looking out at the city the same way I'd been doing moments before. You know, when I started this company 23 years ago, I worked out of a converted garage in East Point. No windows like these, no fancy offices. Just me, 2 employees, and a dream that we could build something different. Something fair. You did build something, I said. You built one of the most successful tech consulting firms in the Southeast. I built a company, he corrected. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of whether I'd built the culture I'd intended, whether the values I'd started with had survived the growth. He turned to face me. You've given me a second chance at that. A chance to course correct, to remember why I started this in the first place. I'm just glad to finally have the opportunity to do the work I've already been doing, I said honestly. It's more than that, though, isn't it? He settled into the chair Derrick had vacated. What you're doing is showing everyone in this company, everyone watching what happened this week, that merit does matter. That excellence can't be ignored forever. That the system can correct itself when its failures are exposed. Can it, though? I asked, the question coming out before I could stop it. Correct itself, I mean. Or does it only correct when there's a crisis that threatens the bottom line? Frederick considered this, his expression thoughtful. That's the question, isn't it? And I don't know if I have a perfect answer. Systems are created by people, and people are flawed. We build in our biases, our blind spots, our limitations. But what we can do is create mechanisms for accountability, ways to catch failures before they become crises. That's what I'm asking you to help me build. The mentorship program, I said. That's part of it. But also the performance review restructuring, the promotion transparency initiatives, the regular audits. You're not just running a sector anymore, Imani. You're helping redesign how this company develops and promotes talent. That's leadership at a level most people never reach. After Frederick left, I sat alone in my office as night fell over Atlanta. The city lights blinked on one by one, and I thought about all the people out there fighting their own battles against systems that didn't see them. How many other Imanis were sitting at desks right now, doing excellent work that would never be recognized? How many were preparing resignation letters because they were tired of being invisible? I pulled out my phone and opened my drafts folder. The resignation letter was still there. The one I'd written in anger and hurt and exhaustion. I read it one last time. Dear Mr. Dawson, please accept this letter as my formal resignation. And then I deleted it. Not because everything was fixed now. Not because one promotion erased 8 years of being overlooked. But because I'd found something worth staying for. The chance to make sure this didn't happen to the next person. The opportunity to build something better from the inside. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Your grandmother would be so proud. We all are. Love you, baby. I wiped my eyes and responded, Love you too, Mama. Monday morning arrived with a strange new rhythm. I got to the office at 6:47 a.m. Some habits die hard. But instead of heading to my old corner desk, I took the elevator to 15. Marcus waved from the security desk, calling out, Morning, Sector Lead Brooks! With genuine warmth. The title still felt foreign. But I was starting to grow into it. My first official leadership meeting was at 8 a.m. The other sector leads, all men, all white except for one Asian colleague, watched me enter with expressions ranging from curious to skeptical. I took my seat at the conference table, opened my laptop, and met their eyes with steady confidence. Good morning, I said. I'm Imani Brooks, and I'm looking forward to working with all of you. One of the older executives, a man named Thomas who'd been with the company since the early days, leaned back in his chair. We've heard quite a bit about you, Ms. Brooks. Quite a dramatic rise to leadership. There was something in his tone, not quite hostile, but testing. Seeing if I'd be defensive or apologetic about how I got here, Not dramatic, I corrected calmly. Overdue. I've been doing director-level work for years. The only thing that's changed is the title and the recognition. A few of the other sector leads exchanged glances. Thomas's eyebrows rose slightly, but then he smiled. A real smile, not a corporate mask. Fair enough. Welcome to the table, Ms. Brooks. The meeting proceeded smoothly after that. I presented my restructuring plan for the sector, fielded questions with the same competence I'd always had, and left feeling like I'd held my own. As I walked back to my office, I passed the 14th floor. Through the glass doors, I could see my old desk. Someone else was sitting there now, a new hire named Patricia who'd just started. She looked overwhelmed, staring at her computer screen with the same expression I'd probably worn 8 years ago. On impulse, I diverted into the floor and walked over to her desk. Patricia? I'm Imani Brooks, sector lead. How's your first week going? She looked up, startled that someone in leadership was speaking to her. Oh, Ms. Brooks, hi. It's a lot. Everyone's been nice, but I feel like I'm drowning in information. I pulled up a chair. Tell me what you're working on. We spent 20 minutes going through her assignments, and I gave her the kind of guidance I'd wished someone had given me when I started. Tips on navigating the systems, shortcuts that would save her hours, contacts who could answer specific questions. When I finally stood to leave, her relief was palpable. Thank you so much, she said. I was worried I'd already messed up somehow. You're doing fine, I assured her. And Patricia? My door is always open. Literally, you saw that glass office up on 15. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. As I walked away, I caught Jennifer watching me with a smile. She gave me a thumbs up, and I realized what I'd just done. I'd become the mentor I'd never had, the leader I'd always needed. That afternoon, I had my first one-on-one meeting with each member of my team. I listened to their concerns, their ideas, their frustrations with how things had been running. I took notes. I asked questions. I made it clear that their voices mattered, that excellence would be recognized, that the old way of doing things was over. By 6 p.m., when most people were packing up to leave, I realized I wasn't the last one on the floor anymore. I didn't have to stay late to prove my worth. My worth had finally been recognized, but I stayed anyway, because there was work I wanted to do. Not work I had to do, work I wanted to do. There's a difference. Around 7:30, Rosa came by with her cleaning cart. She paused at my office door, and I waved her in. Felicidades, she said, her accent thick but her smile bright. You deserve this. Gracias, Rosa. And thank you for always seeing me, even when others didn't. She nodded knowingly, then continued her rounds. I watched her work, steady, thorough, invisible to most people but essential to everything functioning. Just like I'd been, not anymore. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the city at night from my new vantage point. Posted it to social media with a simple caption, 8 years of being told I wasn't leadership material. Today, I'm redefining what leadership looks like. For everyone who's ever been overlooked, your time will come. Stay excellent. Within minutes, the comments flooded in. Former classmates, professional contacts, complete strangers sharing their own stories of being passed over, of fighting to be seen, of finally breaking through. I read each one, and with each story, I felt the weight of what this meant. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every person who'd been told they weren't enough, who'd watched less qualified people climb ladders they'd been holding steady, who'd almost given up. My phone rang. Shanice. Girl, I just saw your post. Are you crying in your fancy new office? Maybe, I admitted with a laugh. Good tears? The best kind. We talked for 20 minutes about everything and nothing. Her dating disasters, my surreal week, our plans for the future. Normal life, friendship, the things that matter beyond corporate titles and salary increases. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my office and thought about the phrase that had started all of this. You're not leadership material. Mark Whitman had meant it as a dismissal, a final word on my potential. But he'd been wrong. Not because I'd changed. I'd been leadership material all along. He just hadn't been able to see it. The system he represented, the biases he embodied, the gatekeeping he practiced, none of it could stop what was inevitable. Excellence doesn't stay invisible forever. Truth doesn't stay buried forever. Justice, even when it's delayed, still arrives. I thought about typing a response to Mark's ghost, some perfect comeback to that devastating phrase. But I didn't need to. My presence in this office, my name on the door, my voice in leadership meetings, that was response enough. I wasn't leadership material, he'd said. No, I thought, smiling to myself. I'm not leadership material. I'm the new standard of leadership, and that makes all the difference.